Hello everyone. Today, we continue our story about the most notorious crime bosses in China. In recent years, China has taken aggressive steps to crack down on organized crime. Within just 2 years, authorities dismantled over 3,000 criminal gangs, arresting nearly 400,000 suspects. Additionally, more than 60,000 officials involved in organized crime were investigated and prosecuted. This campaign has had a significant impact on the country's social, political, and economic landscape, creating a safer and more stable environment for its citizens. An 8-part documentary series produced by China Central Television has meticulously documented some of the most infamous criminal cases. Today, we focus on one of them, the case of Chen Huimin's gang in Jiangxi province. This was the largest organized crime case ever busted in Jiangxi since the founding of modern China. Chen Huimin's gang, consisting of over 100 members, wreaked havoc, oppressing the local population. Over 15 years, they committed 97 crimes, leading to the deaths of 6 people, 3 serious injuries, and 17 minor injuries. What's shocking is that despite orchestrating a brutal murder with a firearm, Chen Huimin was only sentenced to 3 years in prison. Even more outrageously, he served just 2 years and 4 months before being released. It was a scenario that seemed straight out of a crime movie, except it happened in real life. So what exactly did Chen Huimin do? How did he rise to power? And in the end, how was he finally brought to justice? Born in 1974 in Yiguang County, Jiangxi, Chen Huimin was a rebellious child. He refused to study, constantly defied his parents and teachers, and frequently got into fights. Despite being small in stature, he was ruthless in brawls, never holding back. This viciousness quickly made him the leader of his group. After finishing middle school, Chen Huimin dropped out and officially entered the criminal underworld. From then on, he was in and out of police custody for crimes such as gang fights, disturbing public order, and harassing women. He was subjected to multiple reform programs and even faced prison time, but each time he was released, he became more violent. In February 2003, Chen Huimin was once again sent for labor re-education. The moment he was released, he and his younger brother, Chen Huifa, gathered a group of thugs and resumed their illegal activities. They extorted protection money and fought turf wars with rival gangs. His daily life was a series of bloody battles, where a human life was worth no more than a stab wound. But he soon realized that brute force alone wouldn't guarantee survival or dominance. He needed weapons. From then on, he always had the upper hand. If others fought with fists, he used knives. If they had knives, he brought guns. This ruthless approach earned him a fearsome reputation in the criminal underworld. On October 18, 2004, a subordinate of Chen Huimin got into a dispute with a group of local workers. Without bothering to ask questions, Chen gathered his men, armed them, and stormed into the workers' dormitory, attacking indiscriminately. Screams filled the air as blood splattered everywhere. By the end of the assault, 5 workers were seriously injured. The incident caused an uproar in the local community. The longer he operated in the shadows, the more he understood that fists and guns were only temporary tools. To maintain power, he needed money, the key to bribing both enemies and officials. So, he partnered with a fellow Jiangxi native, Sumo Yang, to enter the timber business. Yiguang County was rich in forest resources and a major hub for timber production. With his reputation in the local private sector, businesses, big and small, had no choice but to respect Chen Huimin. As a result, his timber business flourished, generating substantial profits. However, in 2005, tensions arose between him and Sumo Yang. Chen controlled all the business capital, but Su wanted to allocate some funds to start a transportation company. Chen rejected the idea outright, seeing it as unprofitable. Their disagreements grew into heated arguments, making Chen feel that Su was no longer loyal and might even challenge his authority. On the night of July 7, 2005, at around 10 p.m., near an abandoned forestry transport station on North Guan Road, their dispute turned deadly. Under the dim streetlights, Chen Huimin narrowed his eyes at the man who was once his ally, his mind filled with murderous intent. Without hesitation, he pulled out a hidden gun and coldly pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through the air, striking Su Moyang in the back. He staggered, his eyes wide with shock, blood pouring from his mouth. His pulmonary artery had been severed. He collapsed to the cold ground, unable to utter a single word. Chen Huimin stood over the body, his expression devoid of emotion. To him, this was just another obstacle removed. This shooting caused an even greater stir than his previous gang fight, forcing local police to launch a special task force to investigate. Witness testimonies quickly identified Chen as the primary suspect, but before he could be arrested, he fled to Fujian province, putting the case at a standstill. Rumors spread that local authorities were reluctant to pursue him, fueling further public suspicion. After months on the run, Chen realized that he couldn't stay in hiding forever. Coincidentally, as China prepared to celebrate the 60th anniversary of its founding, the government announced a leniency policy for criminals who voluntarily surrendered. Seizing this opportunity, he and his brother devised a plan to turn himself in, but on his own terms. Instead of admitting to premeditated murder, he crafted a story to downgrade his crime to manslaughter. He reconstructed the crime scene, claiming that the gun actually belonged to Su Moyang and that he had merely been holding onto it for safekeeping. On the night of the incident, he said he was returning the gun when it accidentally discharged, killing Su. However, this story completely contradicted the evidence collected by police, as there was a direct eyewitness to the murder. To make his version of events seem credible, Chen pressured two witnesses into providing false testimony. Fearing retaliation, they complied. Once he had fabricated enough supporting evidence and bribed the right people, on May 12, 2010, Chen Huimin was sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison for negligent homicide. Additional charges from a previous assault case increased his total sentence to 4 years. But the most shocking twist came on September 16, 2012, just 2 years and 4 months later, when he was released early. A man who had committed multiple violent crimes, including murder, had served less than 2.5 years. This cemented his reputation as an untouchable figure in the underworld. After his release, he continued recruiting ex-convicts and outlaws into his gang. He stockpiled firearms, knives, and other weapons to strengthen his forces. Under his leadership, the gang became more structured and sophisticated. To maintain control, he established a strict 3-tier hierarchy. He and his brother, Chen Huifa, were at the top. The second tier consisted of trusted lieutenants who managed operations. Each lieutenant controlled a group of subordinates, forming the third tier. Loyalty was paramount. Lower-ranked members had to address superiors as boss and follow orders without question. Any defiance was met with severe punishment. If a mission was assigned, all members had to be ready 24/7. Before any operation, gang members wore masks, handed over their phones, and took every precaution to avoid surveillance. If arrested, they were forbidden from naming superiors or accomplices. Betrayal meant brutal retribution. Those who stayed silent would have their families taken care of, with escape funds or even minors falsely confessing on their behalf. Chen's philosophy was clear. Build your reputation, establish dominance, and the money will follow. With his gang fully established, he set his sights on monopolizing the lucrative sand mining industry in Yihuang. However, another crime boss, Li Yingjing, already controlled the sector. On February 5, 2013, Chen sent over 10 masked men, armed with guns and machetes, to Liu's office. But when they arrived, Liu was nowhere to be found. Enraged, Chen took out his fury on Liu's trusted lieutenant, Li Yingjing. To send a message, he ordered his men to sever Li's left index finger. However, Li Yingjing was also a powerful local crime boss, and his lucrative business was not something he would easily let others take away. As the saying goes, people die for money just as birds die for food. Determined not to back down, Li Yingjing stood his ground. To quickly eliminate Li Yingjing's gang on the night of May 19, 2014, Chen Huimin once again sent his masked men, armed with knives, to hunt down his rivals. This time, 3 members of Li Yingjing's gang were severely injured. After the attack, Chen Huimin issued a ruthless order. No matter who it is, if you see Li Yingjing's people, don't bother reporting. Just take action immediately. During this period, Chen Huidan's gang carried out 17 attacks against Liu Yingjing's group, killing 3 people, severely injuring 1, and leaving 12 others with minor injuries. Through violence and intimidation, he seized control of the sand mining industry, amassing nearly 100 million yuan. But Chen Huidan's ambitions didn't stop at sand mining. He extended his influence into the construction industry in Yihuang. On January 19, 2016, the Yihuang government publicly opened bidding for the Tao River Watercourse renovation project at the Public Resource Trading Center. Chen Huidan wasted no time. Early in the morning, he led his men to the bidding center, armed with knives, openly threatening and assaulting representatives of competing companies. No one dared to resist, and one by one, the businesses were forced to withdraw. As a result, Chen Huidan's gang secured the contract without opposition. Chen Huidan refused to tolerate any competition. In another bidding event, when an out-of-town company boldly challenged him, he flew into a rage. As soon as the bidding ended, he ordered the company's representative to be kidnapped, detained, and brutally beaten before being released. After this violent display, no one dared to challenge his dominance again. His gang monopolized nearly every construction project in Yihuang. If he set his sights on a project, other companies had no chance of competing fairly. Beyond construction, Chen Huidan and his younger brother Chen Huifa also ventured into real estate. When a company from Jiangxi partnered with Chen Huifa on a major development project, they invested 15 million yuan, while Chen Huifa contributed only 2 million. However, as soon as the contract was signed, the Jiangxi company's employees were completely sidelined, replaced by Chen Huifa's people. The project stalled, and their investment became unrecoverable, forcing them to take legal action. Upon hearing this, Chen Huidan retaliated immediately. He sent his men to surround the company, smashing several of their cars. Fearful of his power, the company ultimately gave up, writing off their investment as a loss. By leveraging their criminal influence, the Chen brothers became the underground rulers of Yihuang. Whether in the criminal underworld or within the government, there was nothing they couldn't manipulate. For 15 years, Chen Huidan's gang operated with impunity, committing 97 criminal acts, killing 6 people seriously, injuring 3 and leaving more than 20 others with minor injuries. Their reign of terror severely impacted the local economy and society. In 2018, the national Crackdown on Organized Crime campaign reached Yihuang, and the Chen brothers' case became a priority investigation for the Ministry of Public Security and the National Anti-Organized Crime Task Force. On July 12, 2018, the police formed Task Force 712. 2 days later, in the early hours of July 14th, over 300 elite officers were deployed to Yihuang to capture Chen Huidan and his gang. At around 3 a.m., the police arrived at Chen Huidan's residence. Hearing the E-By officer's call out, he immediately shut off the lights, retrieved a pistol from his safe, and prepared to fight back. But when he peeked out the window and saw the surrounding area swarming with heavily armed officers, he realized there was no escape. After a few moments of hesitation, he put the gun away and surrendered without resistance. That night, Chen Huidan, Chen Huifa, and 18 key gang members were arrested. After nearly 10 months of investigation, on April 16, 2019, a total of 141 gang members had been captured. The authorities confiscated 52 firearms, 468 rounds of ammunition, and over 100 million yuan. On October 27, 2019, the court held the first trial for the case. After the proceedings, Chen Huidan was sentenced to death, while Chen Huifa received 22 years in prison. Another 102 gang members received various sentences. On November 18, 2020, Chen Huidan was executed, marking the end of the most notorious criminal syndicate in Jiangxi province's history. The story of Chen Huidan's gang is more than just a crime case. It is a grim warning about the dangers of criminal organizations infiltrating the economy, society, and even government. For 15 years, violence and shadowy power turned Yihuang into the private domain of a single group, where justice was twisted and the law was disregarded. But in the end, no matter how well hidden, crime cannot escape the reach of justice. This case serves as undeniable proof that justice may be delayed, but it will never be forgotten. Those who defy the law will always pay the price. At the same time, it raises an important question. How can society prevent such tragedies from happening? Again, the answer lies in government transparency, the unwavering enforcement of the law, and most importantly, the vigilance and determination of the people. When society unites against corruption and crime, even the most powerful criminal empires will eventually collapse. In mid-2010, in Singapore, a married woman accidentally met a man online. Their conversations quickly became intimate, and within just a month, they decided to meet in real life. They dated like lovers, going out to restaurants, enjoying stolen moments of passion. The man knew she was married, yet after only 2 weeks, they still decided to spend the night together in a hotel. However, what shocked her the most was the strange request her lover made. "Can your husband join us?" The question made the woman feel disgusted, and she immediately refused. Not long after, she cut off all contact, ending the affair, believing that everything would soon be forgotten. Little did she know that it was all a trap, one set up by her own husband. And this was only the beginning of an 8-year nightmare. So what exactly happened? This case shook Singapore, and due to strict privacy laws, the identities of those involved were kept confidential. Let's begin with a man named Jay, who was 43 years old at the time. In 2008, Jay was just 27, and his wife was a year younger. They had 4 beautiful daughters, and on the surface, they seemed like a normal, happy family. But beneath that respectable facade lurked a horrifying secret. Jay was an active member of an underground forum. On the surface, this forum discussed trending social issues, but beneath that was a hidden world filled with illicit activities. A year after getting married, Jay's wife became pregnant with their first child. This should have been a joyous occasion for their young family, but instead of focusing on his wife, Jay turned his attention to another woman. His infidelity was soon discovered, leaving his wife devastated. Yet, perhaps for the sake of the child she was carrying, she chose to forgive him. However, the pain never truly faded. From that moment on, whenever they argued, Jay's wife would bring up his betrayal in a fit of anger. Then one day, she said to him, "If you can cheat on me, then I can do the same." Her words pierced Jay like a knife. He became obsessed with the idea that his wife might actually betray him. As his paranoia grew, Jay decided to test her. He showed her a video featuring 2 men with 1 woman and asked what she thought about trying something like that. But instead of entertaining the idea, his wife was furious and disgusted. She lashed out at him, leaving Jay feeling humiliated and enraged. Unable to accept being looked down upon by his wife, Jay turned to his underground forum to vent. He complained that she was becoming distant, even suspecting she was having an affair with her superior at work. Underneath his post, numerous users responded with toxic advice. One suggestion in particular caught his attention. Set up a sweet trap to make his wife fall into it herself, then he would never have to live in doubt again. In some countries, for a fee, one can hire a loyalty tester, someone who flirts, with a target online to see if they would stray. If the target gives in, the tester provides chat logs as proof to the client. However, these tests typically remain online, with no physical contact. But for Jay, that wasn't enough. He wanted to take things further. Through the forum, Jay met a man named O. They quickly bonded over their shared interest, discussing each other's romantic partners. O soon became Jay's ideal partner in crime for a special reason. He owned a BMW. Jay was obsessed with the idea that his wife was materialistic. Her ex-boyfriend had also driven a BMW, and Jay believed that if a man with a luxury car approached her, she would fall for him easily. So Jay agreed to let O seduce his wife. Jay personally provided O with his wife's contact information, instructing him to lure her in. Upon receiving the request, O immediately created a new social media account under the name Brad Cheng to approach Jay's wife. Having studied her well beforehand, O skillfully played on her emotions, using sweet words to earn her trust. Throughout the process, he regularly reported back to Jay, detailing every conversation. 1 month later, on August 17, 2010, O and Jay's wife met in person for the first time. They arranged a date at a park, enjoying a romantic dinner together. 2 weeks later, on September 2nd, they met again, this time in the East Coast area for lunch, before heading to a nearby hotel. Initially, O continued to report their meetings to Jay, but he omitted one crucial detail. They had spent the night together. Whether O genuinely developed feelings for Jay's wife or was simply playing his own game, it was unclear. But from that point on, he began to lie. He told Jay that she had lost interest in the affair and that they had stopped communicating. In reality, however, the affair was far from over. Their secret relationship continued to grow even more passionate as they secretly exchanged messages and met in private for the next 2 months, all without Jay's knowledge. On October 26th, Jay took his wife to Marina Bay Sands, a 5-star hotel in Singapore. He told her he wanted a relaxing day together to rekindle their love. But in truth, he had a different plan. While she was in the shower, Jay quickly checked her phone. The messages he found left him speechless. He realized that O had betrayed him. When his wife stepped out of the bathroom, Jay didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he probed with a question. "A neighbor told me they saw you holding hands with a man and entering a hotel together. Is that true?" To his surprise, his wife didn't deny it. She openly admitted to the affair but insisted that it was over. The reason? One day, her lover had suggested inviting Jay to join them for a threesome. The mere thought of it disgusted her, so she cut off contact and even deleted her social media account. Jay accepted her explanation and forgave her. It seemed like the storm in their marriage had finally passed, but what his wife didn't know was that everything had gone exactly as Jay had planned. She also had no idea that Jay was still in contact with O and was already working on a new scheme. Jay told O that the plan had changed. This time, he wanted to witness his wife and O together, with his own eyes. On March 14, 2011, Jay and his wife celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary. Despite the turbulence in their marriage, she believed that the worst was behind them. She raised her glass and drank, feeling relieved. But she had no idea that Jay had secretly laced her drink with a drug. As the substance took effect, she grew dizzy and quickly lost consciousness. Jay then sent a message to O, instructing him to come. When O arrived, Jay helped him move his unconscious wife onto the bed, blindfolding her in case she woke up midway. Watching the scene unfold before him, Jay felt an indescribable mix of emotions, both surreal and overwhelmingly exhilarating. After that night, Jay could no longer stop himself. He began searching underground forums for more men who shared his twisted desires, expanding his network of wife-swapping partners. Before long, a man named M entered the picture. M, 3 years older than Jay, was a shareholder in a company. He expressed a desire to be with Jay's wife, and Jay once again used his usual method, drugging her drink before allowing M to violate her. But this time, Jay didn't just watch, he recorded everything. From then on, more and more men from the forum expressed interest in joining. They even created a private group to discuss their exploits. Eventually, a man named K appeared. At 28, K worked in business development, was married, but had no children. Together, K and Jay took their crimes to a whole new level, making their operations even more systematic and sinister. They began using a powerful sedative, mixing it into Jay's wife's drinks. This drug was colorless, odorless, and acted quickly, rendering the victim unconscious within minutes. However, improper use could result in death. But to these depraved men, it was the perfect tool, because once their victims woke up, they would remember nothing. Jay and Kay even installed hidden cameras in the dark corners of their homes. They recorded their wives being assaulted to share the footage with each other and even live-streamed it for members of their group to watch. These women, in the very homes they believed to be their safest haven, became victims of the men they once trusted the most. On a day in 2010, Kay drugged his wife, covering her eyes before calling Jay over to assault her while he stood by, taking pictures. That same year, they repeated the act. This time, Jay assaulted K's wife. By February 2013, Jay's wife was feeling unwell on a special occasion. Pretending to care, Jay gave her medication, but his real intention was to render her unconscious. Once she was defenseless, K arrived and continued the assault. To them, their wives were no longer partners but mere objects to satisfy their twisted desires. Their depravity escalated as they contemplated expanding their group, inviting more men to join. K even told Jay, "If we can get them pregnant, that would be even more exciting." They exchanged private messages mocking the women they had violated, believing that no matter how intelligent a woman was, she would always succumb to a man's control. Jay took things further. He not only invited men to his home to assault his wife, but also seized opportunities when his wife was away on business trips to attack the wives of other members in the group. Do you remember M? Under the pretense of a work discussion, M brought his ex-wife to Jay's house and drugged her. When she lost consciousness, he held her down so Jay could assault her. Beforehand, Jay had already set up hidden cameras to live-stream the crime to their group. After the assault, Jay kept M's ex-wife's underwear as a gift for another group member, A, a businessman working in the same field as Jay. A was married and had 3 children. In 2013, Jay once again drugged his own wife and invited A over to assault her while the family slept. He filmed everything and stored the footage as part of the group's shared collection. Another associate of A colleague named P, also became involved in their horrific activities. On the night of August 31st, 2017, A spiked his wife's drink with a sedative, causing her to lose consciousness. He then messaged P, "My wife is ready for you." P was thrilled. He had seen photos and videos of their past crimes, but this was his first time participating. In the early hours of September 1st, P arrived at A's home. A's wife lay on the bed, blindfolded and unconscious. P began touching her, but due to physiological issues, he was unable to complete the act. At that moment, A's wife suddenly regained consciousness. She ripped off her blindfold and was horrified to see a strange man standing over her. Panicking, P scrambled to grab his clothes and fled. After regaining her composure, A's wife immediately confronted her husband. Unable to deny the truth, A was forced to confess everything. Disgusted and enraged, she made both men write a full confession. Once exposed, the crimes, spanning 8 years, shocked the public. Innocent women had been repeatedly assaulted, their images and videos disseminated online. The sheer brutality of the case left society reeling. Even when facing trial, Jay refused to fully acknowledge his crimes. He attempted to shift all blame onto his wife. In court, he walked slowly, head bowed, as if burdened by deep remorse. But his testimony painted a different picture. He admitted to assaulting the wives of 2 other men, but insisted he had not wanted to do it, claiming it was merely an act of friendship. Jay also attempted to distance himself from his accomplices, arguing that he should not be judged alongside them. Desperate for justification, Jay brought up his wife's past infidelities in 2010 and 2014, using them as an excuse for his actions. He claimed that her ridicule and insults had deeply wounded him, pushing him to seek revenge. Yet despite his claims of remorse, Jay still insisted that he wanted to atone for his mistakes by receiving his punishment as soon as possible. Fortunately, the judge remained unmoved by his arguments. Realizing he could not gain sympathy from the court, Jay turned to attacking the media. He accused journalists of exaggerating the case, labeling their coverage as biased, unethical, and unprofessional. He blamed everyone but himself, refusing to acknowledge his own depravity. He even argued that media exposure and online discussions had made life difficult for his wife. Perhaps Jay had forgotten the most crucial fact. It was he who had caused his wife the greatest suffering and danger. When all else failed, Jay resorted to a psychiatric evaluation, which diagnosed him with sexual deviance. He brazenly claimed that his wife had forgiven him. However, investigation reports confirmed that at the time of his crimes, Jay was fully conscious and aware of his actions, meaning his diagnosis could not be used to mitigate his sentence. Psychological reports on Jay's wife revealed the immense trauma she had endured. Initially, she believed she had only been assaulted by one person, but when the truth surfaced, she realized she had been a victim of multiple men, with footage of her ordeal spread online. The shock was so overwhelming that her mind nearly shut down. It was as if her brain had activated a defense mechanism, numbing her to the pain. Her only wish now was to survive so she could care for her children and family. Another victim shared a similar ordeal. Upon learning the truth, she considered ending her own life. It took tremendous effort to regain control over her emotions and find the strength to continue living. In the end, the judge handed down severe sentences to the depraved men who had conspired with Jay. Among them, Jay received the heaviest punishment, 29 years in prison. K, the accomplice who helped Jay rape his own wife and assault Jay's wife, was sentenced to 22 years. M, who drugged his ex-wife and assisted Jay in the crime, received a 20-year sentence. L, who raped Jay's wife and consented to having his own wife assaulted, was given 13 years. P, who attempted to assault A's wife but failed, claimed he had only been inside A's house for 5 to 8 minutes and that A had reassured him everything was fine. He was sentenced to 3 years for attempted rape. N, the youngest and unmarried among them, tried to argue for a reduced sentence on the grounds that he had no wife. The court rejected this absurd plea, sentencing him to 18 years. O was the only defendant who outright denied the charges. He attempted to argue that Jay had falsely accused him out of revenge after discovering his wife's affair. However, during cross-examination, O faltered, contradicting himself multiple times. When asked why he had agreed to Jay's request to touch his wife, he failed to provide a coherent answer, only mumbling that he didn't know what else to do and had just gone along with it. The truth, however, was that before O arrived, at Jay's house, they had secretly coordinated their plan to drug the victim. It was evident that the assault had been premeditated. Furthermore, O had been abusing Jay's wife for an extended period, and the two had exchanged private messages filled with their depraved thoughts. On January 30th, 2024, O was sentenced to 13 years in prison. The most absurd part of it all was that Jay also decided to appeal his sentence. He presented 2 reasons. First, that his wife wanted him to return home, and second, that his initial lawyer had failed to provide an adequate defense. The sheer audacity of it was unbelievable. During the hearing, Jay brought letters from his 4 daughters, each testifying to his moral character. However, the court did not read these letters aloud. Additionally, Jay's mother and sister submitted letters pleading for leniency. His mother described him as a devoted son who had always treated his wife and children well. She emphasized that despite their financial struggles, he had never demanded financial support from the family. She implored the court for mercy so they could reunite as soon as possible. The judge listened but remained firm. The severity of Jay's crimes could not be overlooked. While the court sympathized with a mother's love, it could not serve as justification for a lighter sentence. Jay's appeal was ultimately denied. In the end, there are crimes that cannot be justified and wounds that can never be erased. Once a conscience is lost, all that remains is boundless cruelty. This case stands as a chilling reminder of a harsh reality. The most dangerous monsters are not always strangers, but often those we trust the most. In life, forgiveness must never be an excuse for tolerating evil, and trust should never be given to those who do not deserve it. Today, I want to tell you about a case that once shook a small town in Kulai, Johor, Malaysia. Kulai is a quiet town near Johor Bahru, and if you drive for just over an hour, you can reach Singapore. On a fateful night in 2008, a 16-year-old Chinese-Malaysian girl from Kulai finished her shift at work and was preparing to head home, just like any other day. But she had no idea that danger was lurking in the shadows. Within moments, she vanished without a trace. Her disappearance quickly became one of Malaysia's most high-profile kidnapping cases, making headlines nationwide and stirring public outrage. 16 years have passed, yet recently, the case has resurfaced, reigniting debate and raising questions that remain unanswered. So, what really happened on that fateful night? Li Yingjing was born on April 16, 1992, in Johor, Malaysia. She grew up in Kulai and attended Sultan Ibrahim National High School. Coming from a Chinese-Malaysian family, she was the third child, with 2 older sisters and a younger brother. Though she wasn't from a wealthy family, she stood out with her striking beauty. Always well-groomed, from her hairstyle to her outfits, she was often regarded as the school's most beautiful girl. But she wasn't just a pretty face, she was also an exceptional student. In her secondary school exams, she achieved an impressive 7 A's. From a young age, she practiced dance and was a member of her school's silk ribbon dance team. Smart, talented, and hard-working, Li Yingjing was admired by many. Despite her many strengths, she remained humble, warm, and kind to those around her. She often treated her friends to movies and meals, which made her well-liked by everyone. Those who knew her said that with her personality, there was no way anyone could dislike her. Her independence, kindness, and respect for teachers were some of the things people remembered most about her. Naturally, her charm attracted many admirers. At the time, she was even in a stable relationship. To help ease her family's financial burden, she chose to work part-time at a clothing store in a nearby shopping mall. Her politeness, dedication, and charm made her a favorite among both her employer and customers. On September 11, 2008, like any other day, the 16-year-old girl went to work at the mall. Around 10 p.m., when her shift ended, she waved goodbye to her colleagues and prepared to leave. After a long day of studying and working, she was undoubtedly exhausted. But as she stepped out of the mall, she had no idea that her life was about to take a tragic turn. By 11 p.m., Li Yingjing still hadn't arrived home. At first, her family wasn't too concerned, thinking she might have been held up for some reason. But as the hours passed with no word from her, unease crept in. Worry turned into fear. Unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, they made the decision to call the police. That night, her family was restless, staying awake in anxious anticipation, hoping for any news about their daughter. At 6:20 a.m. the following morning, their phone suddenly rang. The caller ID showed Li Yingjing's number. Her parents answered immediately, filled with hope. But the voice on the other end wasn't their daughter's. It was a man. His voice was cold and emotionless. The man declared that Li Yingjing had been kidnapped. He demanded that the family prepare 60,000 ringgit in cash as ransom. If they failed, the consequences would be dire. Her parents panicked. Their worst fear had come true. Without hesitation, they contacted the police. Upon receiving the report, Malaysian authorities immediately formed a special task force, launching a race against time to rescue the 16-year-old girl before it was too late. As I mentioned earlier, Li Yingjing's family wasn't wealthy. Gathering 60,000 ringgit within a day was nearly impossible. While the family struggled to come up with the money, the police worked tirelessly behind the scenes, secretly monitoring the situation. News of the kidnapping spread quickly. One of Li Yingjing's male friends was devastated when he heard what had happened. Having a close relationship with her parents, he stayed by their side, offering comfort and support. He repeatedly urged them to gather the ransom money as quickly as possible to ensure her safety. Meanwhile, the kidnappers were extremely cautious. To avoid being tracked, they never kept their calls longer than 30 seconds and frequently changed the ransom drop-off location, deliberately throwing off the police investigation. After multiple changes, they finally settled on a location in Danga Bay, near Johor Bahru, about a 45-minute drive from Kulai, close to the Singapore border. By the end of the day, the family had only managed to gather 33,000 ringgit, far less than what the kidnappers had demanded. At 3 a.m., risking everything, one of Li Yingjing's friends delivered the money to the designated spot, placing it in a bush as instructed. But then, the worst-case scenario unfolded. After taking the money, the kidnappers vanished. No calls, no messages, no sign that they had released her. Had they broken their promise and killed the hostage? With growing fear, the police intensified their investigation. At 6:15 p.m. that evening, police intercepted a four-wheel drive vehicle on the road and arrested 3 young men inside. An hour later, they expanded their operation and captured 4 more suspects. In total, 7 people were taken into custody for questioning. After screening, 3 were released due to lack of involvement, but 4 remained under investigation. The 4 detained suspects were identified as Kim Hong, 22, Liang Sun Long, 17, Wang Sun Heng, 16, and Wang Ka Wai, 16. Authorities also confiscated a Proton Canary, a Malaysian-made vehicle. Inside, they found the ransom bag, still filled with cash, clear evidence linking them to the crime. But the most shocking revelation came when police interrogated them. It turned out all 4 suspects had known Li Yingjing personally. They had all dropped out of school and had previous connections with her. Yet the biggest betrayal came from someone completely unexpected. One of the masterminds behind the crime was the very person who had pretended to be her family's closest ally. The one who stayed by her parents' side, acting concerned, constantly urging them to pay the ransom, was in fact manipulating them the entire time. This suspicious behavior eventually raised red flags for the family. Their growing doubts led police to focus on him, and what they uncovered was horrifying. He wasn't just aware of the kidnapping, he had played a major role in orchestrating it. However, his exact identity was never disclosed, leaving the public in suspense. After further interrogation, the 4 suspects finally confessed to the gruesome truth. They had killed Li Yingjing. Her body had been dumped in a grassy field at a park in Kulai. Acting on the confession, police rushed to the location. There, they found her remains. Her lower body had been severely burned, and her face bore signs of scorching. A forensic examination later confirmed that it was indeed the missing girl. The autopsy revealed that Li Yingjing had died from asphyxiation. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Experts concluded that she had been murdered shortly after being kidnapped and had been dead for over 24 hours. Her body had been abandoned in a desolate area, just 100 meters from a highway toll booth. The site was overgrown with weeds, rarely visited, and occasionally used as an illegal dumping ground. At the scene, the overwhelming stench of decomposition filled the air. Investigators found a 30-centimeter deep hole with burn marks, proof that the killers had attempted to dispose of her body by fire, but the flames hadn't been enough to destroy the evidence, and in the end, the truth was laid bare. On November 24, 2008, Li Yingjing's family retrieved her body from the morgue for her funeral. Around 200 people attended the sorrowful ceremony, friends, relatives, classmates. At the altar, her family placed her favorite photograph. In it, she wore light makeup and had a gentle smile, a heartbreaking reminder of the girl she once was. Friends of Li Yingjing folded over 400 paper roses as a tribute to their love and grief. Alongside them, farewell cards filled with heartfelt messages lay on the altar. Her parents prepared a white dress and a pair of ballet shoes to be buried with her, hoping that in the afterlife, she could continue to pursue her dream of dancing. Li Yingjing's short life was filled with love, yet that love could not save her from a tragic fate. Her death sent shockwaves through her family, especially her mother. The unbearable grief pushed her into severe depression, and her relatives had to constantly support her, fearing she would be consumed by sorrow. Following the investigation, the police discovered that the 4 arrested suspects had no prior criminal records. Additionally, no murder weapon was found in their possession. This raised a disturbing question. What could have driven these young men to commit such a brutal crime against Li Yingjing? Speculation ran wild among the public. The most widely believed theory pointed to Kim Hong, the 22-year-old mastermind behind the crime. He had harbored deep feelings for Li Yingjing and had repeatedly confessed to her, only to be rejected, each time. Unable to handle the humiliation of rejection, he conspired with 3 accomplices to abduct her. Their goal wasn't just to force themselves on her, but also to extort her family for ransom. However, the crime escalated beyond what anyone could have imagined. Even after receiving the ransom, they did not release their captive. Instead, they made the horrifying decision to kill Li Yingjing and attempted to burn her body to destroy. the evidence. The police concluded that because she recognized her kidnappers, releasing her would have led to their arrest. To cover their tracks, they silenced her permanently. Li Yingjing had been in a steady relationship for nearly a year. Despite having many admirers, she always kept her distance, never giving her boyfriend a reason to worry. However, about 2 months before the incident, Tae Kim Hong began harassing her. He sent relentless messages and made frequent phone calls, frustrating and disturbing her. She confided in her boyfriend about the issue, but he didn't interfere too much, merely advising her to be cautious. He trusted that she was mature enough to handle the situation. That decision would later become the biggest regret of his life. When Li Yingjing was kidnapped, her boyfriend immediately suspected that someone familiar was involved. The kidnappers, using her phone to contact him, called out his name directly. In her contacts, he was saved under the nickname Love, yet they knew his full name without hesitation. This led him to believe that the perpetrators were not strangers. They knew her, and they knew their relationship. Frantically, he scrambled to gather the ransom money, even considering taking out loans. But in the end, all his desperate efforts only brought him back a lifeless body and a tragedy beyond repair. Never in his worst nightmares did he imagine that people who knew Li Yingjing could be so cruel as to turn a kidnapping for ransom into a horrific murder. On this day, the 4 suspects were officially charged with kidnapping and murder. However, due to the need for forensic verification and DNA analysis, the trial was repeatedly delayed. It wasn't until 2010 that the case was finally brought before the Johor High Court. Under Malaysian law, those convicted of murder face the death penalty. However, there are 2 exceptions. Pregnant women and minors are exempt from capital punishment, regardless of the severity of their crime. In this case, only Tae Kim Hong was legally an adult. The other 3 were under 18, meaning they could only receive long-term imprisonment instead of execution. As proceedings commenced, the prosecution laid out the charges, and the judge examined the evidence against each defendant. During the trial, Wong Ka-wai, 16, was acquitted due to a lack of direct evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder. However, Tae Kim Hong, Leong Soon Long, and Wong Soon Heng were found to have sufficient evidence against them and were required to defend themselves in court. Being the only adult among them, Tae Kim Hong was the first to present his defense. He denied all allegations, insisting that he had nothing to do with the crime. He testified that at the time of the incident, he was working at a barber shop. He claimed that he had lent his Proton Canary car to a friend named Wang Jian, who supposedly needed it to take his girlfriend out. According to him, Wang Jian returned the car around midnight the next day. The next morning, when Tae Kim Hong got into his car, he coincidentally found Li Yingjing's phone left inside. He claimed that the SIM card had already been removed, so he decided to sell the phone for money. Later, he contacted his 2 remaining accomplices and met them at a restaurant to discuss selling the phone at a second-hand mobile shop. Furthermore, he stated that shortly after the incident, Wang Jin approached him again at the barbershop, asking to borrow his car once more. This time, Wang Jian even paid him 500 ringgit as a thank you. Tae Kim Hong attempted to dissociate himself from the crime by claiming that the black plastic bag containing ransom money, which was later found in his car, had been left there by Wang Jian and had nothing to do with him. The police, however, quickly dismissed his testimony, finding the existence of Wang Jian highly suspicious. During cross-examination, Tae Kim Hong was repeatedly asked about Wang Jian's background, his hometown, address, family details, and acquaintances. Yet, he failed to provide any concrete answers, only mumbling, "I don't know." This rendered his alibi utterly unconvincing. As he realized the weaknesses in his defense, Tae Kim Hong changed his strategy. He accused the police of torture and forced confession. He claimed that during his detention, he was mistreated, threatened, and subjected to extreme measures to coerce an admission of guilt. He alleged that the police electrocuted him and even attempted to drown him to force a confession. He also accused them of forcing him to visit the crime scene to fabricate evidence against him. Following his lead, Liang Xunlong and Wang Xunheng also denied their roles in the murder, trying to downplay their involvement. However, the prosecution presented irrefutable evidence that all three had played crucial roles in the abduction and killing. Throughout the trial, their defense arguments failed to convince the court and only fueled public outrage. On this day, the Johor High Court delivered its ruling. All three defendants were convicted of both kidnapping and murder. The court announced that the final sentencing would be issued on March 31, 2011 at the Kuala Lumpur High Court. During the final hearing, the judge strongly condemned their actions, emphasizing that despite their young age, they had committed an atrocious crime, ruthlessly taking the life of a 16-year-old girl. Not only had they killed her, but they had also attempted to burn her body to destroy evidence. The judge pointed out their complete lack of remorse and extreme cruelty, concluding that they must face the full weight of the law. Although sentenced to death, the fate of the two underage defendants in the case, Wang Xunheng and Liang Xunlong, was not entirely sealed. Under Malaysia's juvenile protection law, they could escape the death penalty and instead receive life imprisonment. However, whether their sentences would be reduced depended entirely on the Sultan of Johor, who had the constitutional power to grant pardons. Malaysia is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country, but Islam is the official religion under its constitution. In most states, a Muslim is appointed as the state's ruler and is known as the Sultan. The term Sultan originates from Arabic and means ruler. Within his authority, the Sultan has the power to grant pardons to prisoners, including juvenile offenders. Therefore, the future of Wang Xunheng and Liang Xunlong was entirely in the hands of the Sultan of Johor. As for Tay Kim Hong, since he was already 22 at the time of the crime, he was sentenced to death by hanging for murder. Additionally, he received another death sentence for kidnapping. Li Yingtian's family attended every court session hoping for justice. While they knew their daughter could never return, they believed Tay Kim Hong's sentencing was fair. At least the perpetrator was given the punishment he deserved. In 2013 and 2015, Tay Kim Hong appealed twice in an attempt to overturn his death sentence, but both appeals were rejected. From that point on, he remained imprisoned, awaiting execution. Meanwhile, the two juvenile offenders stayed in prison, waiting for a final decision. It seemed the case had finally come to a close, but in 2023, an unexpected turn of events reignited public outrage. In April 2023, Malaysia officially passed a law abolishing mandatory death sentences. Previously, under Malaysian law, serious crimes such as drug trafficking, murder, terrorism, and illegal firearms possession were automatically punishable by death, with no exceptions. However, under the new law, the death penalty was not entirely abolished. Judges now had the discretion to determine sentences based on the severity of the crime. This change opened the door for many death row inmates who had not yet been executed to appeal for reduced sentences. Tay Kim Hong was one of those who submitted a request for retrial. On May 16, 2024, Tay Kim Hong was officially retried at the federal court. His defense attorney emphasized that he had shown genuine remorse and argued that his act of burning the victim's body was not an act of cruelty, but merely an attempt to destroy evidence. The lawyer also claimed that the suffocation caused by gagging Li Yingtian did not last too long and could be considered a mitigating factor. Additionally, they argued that Tay Kim Hong was only 22 at the time, young and impulsive, not a heartless criminal. Despite fierce opposition from the victim's family and the public, the three judges of the federal court unanimously issued a new ruling. Tay Kim Hong was sentenced to 40 years in prison and 17 strokes of the cane, 5 for kidnapping, and 12 for murder. His sentence was backdated to the time of his arrest in 2008. This meant that Tay Kim Hong would be released in September 2048 at the age of 62. If he displayed good behavior in prison, he might be granted early release. The verdict sparked intense controversy. Li Yingtian's family was devastated, arguing that the ruling could never compensate for the immense loss they had endured. They also feared that even after his release, their family would never be truly safe from the threat of revenge. Some legal experts criticized the decision, warning that reducing Tay Kim Hong's sentence could undermine public confidence in the justice system. Nevertheless, the abolition of mandatory death sentences had already been enacted and could not be reversed. For Tae Kim Hong, the 40-year prison sentence was final and would not be changed. Looking back, this case was not just a shocking crime, it was a grim reminder of the dangers that could lurk around us. Sometimes the greatest threats do not come from strangers, but from those we once trusted. Today, we'll talk about a horrifying massacre that took place in the early 21st century in Shenzhen, Guangdong Province, China. The central figure in this case is Mr. Chu Yinan, the former vice president of a well-known media organization in Hong Kong. At the height of his career, he was considered one of the wealthiest and most successful men, known for his cautious and discreet nature. However, despite meticulously planning every aspect of his life, he never anticipated the catastrophe he would unleash upon himself when he unknowingly connected two social classes that should never have crossed paths. On May 29, 2004, one of EA, Chu Yinan's employees sensed something was wrong after failing to reach his boss for 3 consecutive days. His mobile phone was turned off, and the landline at his home was out of service. Worried that something terrible had happened, the employee decided to visit his boss's residence in Futian District, Shenzhen, to check on him. Chu's home was a villa in a quiet residential area called Trust Garden. But as soon as the employee arrived, he was forced to stop in his tracks. A strong, foul odor emanated from inside the house. He knocked repeatedly, but there was no response. Strangely, Chu's car was still parked in the driveway, covered in dust, indicating it hadn't been used for days. Feeling uneasy, the employee sought permission from the security guard, then climbed through a window to investigate. The moment he stepped inside, he was met with a horrifying, blood-soaked scene. Shocked and terrified, he immediately called the police. Shenzhen police quickly arrived at the scene. The initial investigation revealed that the entire Chu family had been brutally murdered inside their home. Investigators discovered the bodies of 5 people: Chu Yinan, his mistress Zhang Yongjing, a 4-year-old girl, accountant Dang Zhenjiang, and a 16-year-old maid named Lin Jin. Among them, Chu had suffered the most brutal attack, with multiple stab wounds to the neck. Dang had died from severe head trauma, while the others had been suffocated to death. Further examination of the crime scene revealed that all cash, credit cards, and several valuable possessions had been stolen from Chu's home. Chu Yinan had lived in Trust Garden, one of the most luxurious residential areas at the time. In 1998, he purchased his 150-square-meter villa for 1.2 million yuan. Back then, mortgage loans were uncommon, and most wealthy buyers paid for their homes in full. Despite his immense wealth, Chu led a relatively simple and low-profile life. He dressed modestly, never flaunted his riches, and even opted for budget-friendly barbershops instead of high-end salons. He had no known disputes or conflicts with his neighbors. However, details from the crime scene led investigators to question whether this was truly a robbery homicide or a revenge killing. After all, even a 4-year-old child was not spared, suggesting that this was more of a targeted massacre than a mere crime for money. So who could have held such deep hatred toward Chu Yinan to slaughter his entire family? To answer this, we must first understand the life of the man himself. Chu Yinan had a unique fate. He was known for his adaptable nature. In 1983, he graduated from the Beijing University of Posts and Telecommunications and was assigned to the Advertising Production Department of China Central Television. As advertising revenues surged over the years, Chu, known for his diligence and reliability, rose to the position of chairman and even secured a 10% stake in the company. Upon digging deeper, police found that Chu's wealth was not overly complicated. Although his business ventures had not always been smooth, there were no indications that he had made any enemies serious enough to warrant such a brutal attack. In contrast, his personal and marital life seemed to contain far more secrets. After moving to Hong Kong in 1990, his relationship with his wife, Zhao, began to deteriorate. In their 8 years of marriage, they never had children together. By the end of 1998, when Chu returned to Shenzhen, he was no longer seen with his wife. It was assumed that they had separated, as he was now living with a much younger woman. Fai, woman murdered alongside Chu Xiangyongjing, was initially believed to be his second wife. However, upon investigation, the police discovered that Chu had never officially divorced his first wife. Thus, Xiang was merely his mistress. To the neighbors, Xiang was a cheerful and beautiful woman who spoke with a Sichuan accent. She was 21 years younger than Chu, with an older brother and 2 older sisters. When she was 3, a violent argument broke out between her parents. The next day, her mother mysteriously died at home. Her father, Xiang Wenbin, was suspected of murdering his wife and was arrested. As a result, the Xiang siblings became orphans overnight, left in the care of their frail grandparents with little support from extended family. 3 years later, due to a lack of conclusive evidence, Xiang Wenbin was released. But his absence had already plunged the family into extreme hardship. All 4 children had to drop out of school after primary education. To survive, Xiang Yongjing took on various jobs. She endured countless hardships but earned very little. By the time she was 16 or 17, she decided to leave her hometown in search of a better life. The once poor girl had grown into a striking, young woman, her fair skin and slender figure catching the attention of many men on the streets. In the following years, she drifted through major cities like Beijing and Shenzhen. However, no one knew exactly what she had experienced during this time. In 1997, she returned to her hometown as an entirely different person. Dressed in fashionable clothes and adorned with dazzling jewelry, she stunned the neighbors. The ring on her finger alone was worth more than 9,000 yuan, a fortune for the rural community she came from. By the end of 1998, through introductions from friends and family, she met Yang Wen, a bus driver in Hongya County, Sichuan. Yang was a divorced man with a child from his previous marriage. Despite warnings from those around her, she married him in April 1999, but their marriage was far from happy. The couple frequently argued. In 2001, she gave birth to a daughter, Yang Xiuyue. However, when the baby was only 6 months old, Xiang abruptly left her hometown, claiming she was going to Shenzhen to learn beauty techniques. She then disappeared for over 6 months without returning home once. When she returned home for a rare Lunar New Year visit, she only stayed for a little, over 10 days before leaving again. This behavior started making her husband, Yang Wen, suspicious. Feeling uneasy, he decided to follow the address where he had been sending baby formula for their daughter. There, to his shock, he discovered the presence of a man named Chu Yinan. Realizing his wife had been having an affair. On February 20th, 2002, Yang Wen made the decision to file for divorce. In reality, Xiang Yongjing had met Chu Yinan years earlier when she first moved to Beijing for work. However, at the time, Chu was still married and often away in Hong Kong for business. Not feeling secure in that situation, Yongjing ultimately returned home and married another man. But after she gave birth to her daughter, Chu Yinan unexpectedly reached out to her, reigniting their past feelings. Since her marriage with Yang Wen was already unhappy, she quickly gave in. Not long after, she made the decision to take her daughter to Shenzhen to live with Chu Yinan. From then on, she rarely returned home. Life in Shenzhen was easy for her. Every day, she would visit the Viet Lai tea house in her apartment complex, where she played cards and relaxed. There, she met many women in similar situations, including Wu Yuanshui. In 1997, when Hong Kong was handed back to China, it triggered a surge in wealthy Hong Kong men keeping mistresses on the mainland. Women like Xiang Yongjing could earn anywhere from H$3,000 to H$10,000 a month without doing any hard labor. Wu Yuanshui came from a poor rural family in Hubei province. Since childhood, she had been ambitious, determined to escape poverty. After finishing middle school, she moved to Guangdong to work, dreaming of a better life. However, she soon realized that without education or skills, ambition alone wouldn't change her fate. Eventually, she turned to special services. She didn't just rely on Hong Kong men for money, she also acted as a broker, managing and controlling a group of women in the same trade. For Wu Yuanshui, daily life revolved around pleasing her Hong Kong lover and indulging in entertainment. One of her greatest pleasures was playing cards at the Viet Lai tea house. Before long, she became close with Li Yingjing, a regular at the tea house. Yingjing was outgoing and never distanced herself from others. Even if she lost thousands at the gambling table, she remained unfazed. She also loved bragging about her husband, Chu. Sometimes she would boast about the gourmet food he had bought, other times about his latest investment projects. Meanwhile, Wu Yuanshui, despite years of hustling, hadn't even managed to buy herself a home. Both women came from poor backgrounds and struggled their way up from misfortune, yet their lives turned out completely different. Li Yingjing was lucky. Her beauty made it easy for her to find a wealthy man to rely on. Her life was filled with luxury, 2 expensive cars, a lavish home, and a maid to care for her child. In contrast, Wu Yuanshui wasn't particularly attractive, and time was only making things worse for her. She often told her friends that finding a rich man was the only way to secure a comfortable future. Yet, her current reality was grim. On one hand, she had a beautiful friend living in luxury. On the other, her Hong Kong lover was growing increasingly distant. In fact, in the months leading up to the incident, her lover had stopped giving her money altogether, claiming she was getting old and no longer attractive. This infuriated her. In April 2004, she sought out Luo Jun, a former colleague of her brother-in-law, to discuss a secret plan. Luo Jun was a fugitive, wanted for embezzlement. Wu Yuanshui told him she wanted to find some thugs to teach her Hong Kong lover a lesson and in the process, extract a large sum of money before disappearing. Luo Jun immediately agreed, but there was a problem. The Hong Kong man had already been warned about Wu Yuanshui. Many of his friends had told him she was greedy and capable of anything for money, possibly even plotting something sinister. Although he didn't fully believe the warnings, he remained cautious, making it impossible for Luo Jun and his men to strike. After waiting for days without an opportunity, Luo Jun grew impatient. He told Wu Yuanshui, "Instead of waiting, why not find someone else with money to rob?" Instantly, Wu Yuanshui thought of Li Yingjing. What made it worse was that the target of the scheme remained completely unaware. She continued treating Wu Yuanshui as a close friend, often inviting her over to play cards without the slightest suspicion. And so, in early May 2004, during a card game at Li Yingjing's home, Wu Yuanshui quietly began devising a sinister plan. That day, as the game was heating up, one of their card-playing friends had to leave unexpectedly. Wu Yuanshui saw her chance. "Why don't I call someone to take her place?" she suggested. Without hesitation, she picked up the phone and called Luo Jun. About 30 minutes later, Luo Jun arrived at Chu Yinan's home. It was the first time all Wu, 3 of them, Li Yingjing, Wu Yuanshui, and Luo Jun, were together in the same place. From that day on, Wu Yuanshui became the inside informant, secretly observing and memorizing the family's routines, while Luo Jun continued using card games as an excuse to scope out their home. During this time, they even met Chu Yinan. However, Luo Jun couldn't determine just how wealthy the family was, and he hesitated. After 2 more weeks of observation, he temporarily returned to his hometown in Chuzhou, Hunan province. But just days later, Wu Yuanshui called, urging him to come back. She claimed the perfect time to strike had come and told him to return to Shenzhen immediately. At the time, Luo Jun was in his hometown with a friend, Zhang Dao, planning to steal a car. Hearing the news, he abandoned that plan, grabbed a few pre-sharpened knives, and convinced Zhang Dao to join him. He then contacted 2 other accomplices online, Zheng An and Hu Gang. The 4 of them, armed with weapons, set off for Shenzhen. They agreed to act on May 26th. That day, Li Yingjing took her daughter to the hospital while Chu Yinan went to work. The only person left at home was their 16-year-old maid. It was the perfect opportunity. Wu Yuanshui gave Luo Jun the family's phone number, instructing him to call the maid and pretend to be a friend of Li Yingjing delivering a package. Just as expected, the young maid didn't suspect anything. When she got the call, she opened the door without hesitation and even offered the men tea. But the moment she turned her back, Zhang Dao swiftly pulled out a knife and held it to her throat. Terrified, The maid didn't even have time to scream before Zhang Dao and Luo Jun tied her up and gagged her. With the only person in the house now subdued, Luo Jun immediately called Zheng An and Hu Gang inside while he stood outside to keep watch. Inside, the three criminals made themselves comfortable. They turned on the TV and lounged on the sofa for over 2 hours, waiting for the homeowners to return. At 4 p.m., Li Yingjing and her daughter were the first to arrive. The moment she stepped inside, she was ambushed. Then, at around 6 p.m., Chu Yunan came home. He was quickly tied up, and before he could say a word, they gagged him. Both victims were completely under the gang's control, unable to resist. By 7 p.m., Hu Gang and Zheng An had searched the entire house, taking multiple bank cards, mobile phones, 3,800 yuan, and 620 Hong Kong dollars. At 9 p.m., Zhang Dao called La Jun over and handed him the bank books and cards they had found. La Jun left immediately, heading to a nearby ATM, where he withdrew 5,000 yuan from Li Yingjing's account. By 11 p.m., the company accountant of Chu Yinan also returned home. The criminals subdued him using the same methods. At that point, everyone in the household had been captured. Zhang Dao called La Jun again, telling him to return and retrieve 2 more bank cards found in the master bedroom. When La Jun checked one of them, he was shocked. It held over 6 million yuan. He immediately informed Zhang Dao. But then Zhang Dao delivered bad news. The old accountant was dead. At that moment, they suddenly realized that the 16-year-old maid had seen La Jun's face. They debated what to do. In the end, Zhang Dao decided to kill all the witnesses. He reasoned that since one person had already died, there was no turning back. La Jun remained silent but did not object. From that moment on, things spiraled out of control. Inside the house, Zhang Dao, Zheng An, and Hu Gang divided the killings among themselves. Zhang Dao and Zheng An were in charge of dealing with Chu Yinan and the maid. Hu Gang handled Li Yingjing. After the murders, only 4-year-old Yang Zhihui was left. Earlier, they had discussed what to do with her if they had to eliminate all witnesses. Both La Jun and Wu Yanshui had daughters of their own, so they opposed killing a child. But Zhang Dao coldly stated, "We've come this far. Even if I don't want to do it if no one else will, then I'll do it myself." It took several days before the horrific crime was discovered. During that time, the 5 perpetrators brazenly used the stolen bank cards to shop at major malls in Shenzhen. They squandered over 630,000 yuan on gold, phones, and video cameras. Afterward, they split up and fled. Wu Yanshui escaped to Dongguan. However, the police quickly identified Wu Yanshui as a key suspect. She was the first to be arrested. Once, in custody, she broke down completely and confessed everything, exposing her accomplices. Within 30 hours, the remaining 4 were captured one by one. On September 13, 2004, the Shenzhen Intermediate People's Court held a public trial for the 5 main defendants and 2 others charged with harboring criminals and handling stolen goods. All 5 principal offenders were sentenced to death. By the end of November 2004, they were executed. Witnesses at the execution reported that they remained calm, making no scenes. The case was truly horrifying. As time passed, it faded from public memory, but the harsh lessons of greed, dishonesty, and the price of poor choices remained. Hello Wang Qingyun was born in 1956 in Chongqun City, Jilin Province. She had 2 older sisters, a younger sister, and a younger brother. Coming from a large family, their living conditions were poor. The entire household relied solely on her father's meager income to survive. Watching her father grow weaker each day, Qingyun felt deeply distressed. She often helped her family with whatever she could. One day, while out collecting firewood, she accidentally slipped down a slope. Her leg went numb, and the pain was so intense that she screamed for help. Fortunately, a friend who had accompanied her quickly ran back to inform her family, and she was taken to the hospital in time. However, due to financial difficulties, she did not receive proper treatment. Her leg was only given basic medical attention before she was sent home to recover on her own. As a result, her condition worsened over time, leading to a permanent disability. As she grew up, Qingyun followed the typical path of many other women. She got married and had children. Despite their continued struggles with poverty, she had a loving husband who cared for her deeply, which gave her hope in life. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long. When her daughter turned 18, Qingyun's husband passed away due to illness, leaving her with the entire burden of the family. With no source of income, Qingyun was forced to find work. However, because of her disability, many employers rejected her. Eventually, she managed to secure a job as a cleaner. But her busy work schedule meant she had little time to care for her daughter, Sun Jiayue, who gradually became rebellious. Almost every day, Jiayue would skip school to spend time at internet cafes playing online games. After multiple warnings that yielded no results, the school finally decided to expel Jiayue. Now completely unsupervised, she became even more reckless. Not only did she chat with strangers online, but she also secretly traveled to Wuhan to live with a boyfriend she had met on the internet. When Qingyun found out, she was so furious that she fell seriously ill. However, her daughter remained firm in her decision and refused to return home. Eventually, Qingyun had no choice but to accept reality. She thought that if her daughter could find a stable place to settle down early on, it might not be such a bad thing. At the very least, she wouldn't have to suffer from poverty at home. From that point on, Qingyun lived alone. Looking at the empty house, she felt a deep sense of loneliness. Whenever she missed her daughter, she would talk to her through video calls. One day, while on a call with Jiayue, she noticed an injury on her daughter's face. It wasn't until later that she learned Jiayue had been abused by her boyfriend. That very afternoon, Qingyun immediately bought a bus ticket and set off for Wuhan. She had always believed her daughter was living a happy life, but when she finally saw her, she was heartbroken. Not only had Jiayu lost weight, but her mental state was also severely deteriorated. At that moment, Qingyun felt like a completely incompetent mother. What angered her even more was the discovery that Jiayue had become addicted to drugs. Worse, still, after probing deeper, Qingyun learned that her daughter's boyfriend, Wang Hongliang, had a history of drug-related offenses. He had previously been sentenced for illegal drug possession, but had not changed his ways even after being released from prison. Upon arriving in Wuhan, he resumed his drug trafficking operations. He met Jiayue online and lured her in with sweet words, convincing her to move to Wuhan. At first, he treated her well, showering her with affection and care. However, as time passed, his interest in her faded, and he began neglecting her. Stranded in a foreign city, Jiayu felt abandoned. With no one to rely on, she eventually fell into drug addiction. She relied on Wang Hongliang to supply her with drugs to satisfy her cravings. Of course, the drugs weren't free. Wang demanded that Jiayue pay with her body, otherwise he would beat her. Seeing her daughter so frail and helpless, Qingyun was devastated. She decided to take Jiayue back home, hoping to help her overcome her addiction. However, Qingyun herself was in poor health and had no job. They constantly struggled with financial difficulties. In a moment of despair, looking for a way to numb her emotions, Qingyun tried taking a few puffs of the drugs her daughter was using. She never imagined that those few attempts would pull her into a dark abyss she could never escape. The turning point. To afford more drugs, Qingyun even sold her own house. Despite multiple attempts to quit, she repeatedly failed. At times, she contemplated suicide, but the thought of leaving her daughter alone in the world always stopped her. In her desperation, a new idea crossed her mind. What if she became a drug dealer herself? That way, she wouldn't have to worry about money to buy drugs and could even make some profit. She then reached out to Wang Hongliang, her daughter's ex-boyfriend, and embarked on the path of drug trafficking. Qingyun was meticulous in her operations. She researched online for secret transportation routes and personally handled all transactions to minimize risks. She never entrusted others with drug deliveries. To further ensure security, she rented multiple houses across Chongqun city, using them as stash spots. Each shipment was carefully hidden in different locations, and whenever a customer came to pick up goods, Qingyun would instruct her daughter or a trusted associate to complete the transaction, ensuring she never appeared in person. To avoid drawing police attention, she implemented strict self-imposed rules. no matter how familiar a client was. She never sold large quantities in a single transaction. This cautious approach allowed her to operate smoothly for many years. Her drug business reflected both the precision of a calculated mind and the recklessness of someone who had lost control of her life. As we all know, prolonged drug use often leads to erratic behavior, and Qingyun was no exception. Even at 54 years old, she maintained relationships with over 10 young men who catered to her desires. Among them, her favorite was a young man named Bai Jin. At just 23 years old, Bai Jin was tall, handsome, and came from a well-off family. Under normal circumstances, he would have never ended up as the lover of a woman old enough to be his mother, especially since Qingyun's appearance was rather ordinary. However, fate often takes unexpected turns. Bai Jin had fallen into drug addiction. After his family discovered this, they completely cut off his financial support. Left with no money, the unbearable withdrawal symptoms made it nearly impossible for him to continue using drugs. That was when he met Qingyun, a drug dealer. Having lived in loneliness for years, Qingyun was instantly attracted to Bai Jin. Learning about his predicament, she was overjoyed. She made him an irresistible offer. If he agreed to stay by her side, she would supply him with unlimited drugs for free. Not only that, but she would also give him money for his personal expenses. Although such a demand was difficult for a 20-year-old man to accept, the cravings from his addiction made it unbearable. After much deliberation, Bai Jin finally agreed. From that moment on, he became Wang Qingyun's kept man. Every time she touched him, he felt nauseous, especially when he was sober. Many times he wanted to leave her, but whenever withdrawal symptoms kicked in, he had no choice but to return. Qingyun understood his thoughts well. Every time he tried to leave, she had her own ways of punishing him. Once, when an exceptionally beautiful woman came to buy drugs, Bai Jin stole a few glances at her. Qingyun immediately ordered him to have sex with her right in front of the woman. What was even more terrifying was that after it was over, Qingyun demanded that Bai Jin, the woman, and another man named Xiao Jiang all have fun together. This lifestyle continued for more than 6 months until Qingyun met another young man named Zhao. Only then did Bai Jin's situation slightly improve. Aside from the dozen or so young men who satisfied her physical needs, Qingyun also maintained relationships with various drug addicts. Those who couldn't afford drugs often visited her stash houses to get high for free. However, the condition was that they had to spend the night with her. As a result, there was always a group of men lingering around her places. Thanks to these men, Qingyun's drug business flourished, and she got everything she desired. However, as her operations expanded, rivals began to grow jealous. They sought ways to sabotage her. Some stole her shipments, while others reported her to the police. Unable to tolerate the harassment, Wang Qingyun decided to strengthen her own power. She recruited a group of recently released ex-convicts and formed a gang to protect her drug trafficking routes. With their assistance, her business became even smoother. Within just 2 years, she had risen to become the most powerful drug lord in the region. The underworld even gave her a notorious title, the Drug Queen. The reason was simple. Qingyun had access to all kinds of drugs. Whether it was powder, pills, or any other form, she could provide it. With such a diverse inventory, she expanded her business to Wuhan, Tianjin, Chongqun, and several other cities. She wasn't just running the trade herself, she even pulled her own daughter, Sun Jiayue, into the business. Though Jiayue had already become frail from drug addiction, she remained determined to follow her mother's footsteps. Qingyun entrusted her daughter with private tasks such as collecting and distributing shipments. The process was methodical. Qingyun and her new lover Zhao would fly to Wuhan to pick up the drugs. Once they secured the goods, they would take a long-distance bus back to Chongqun. At a rented apartment, Qingyun would divide the drugs into smaller portions before handing them over to Jiayu, who would then make deliveries to designated locations. This method had worked for many years. However, at around 10 a.m. on April 10th, a young woman named Chen Danfeng from Jilin province, introduced by a friend, arrived at one of Qingyun's stash houses to purchase drugs. Everything seemed to go smoothly, but the moment she stepped out of the building, she was surrounded by police. In reality, as early as 2009, law enforcement had received anonymous tips about Qing Yun and her daughter's long-term drug trafficking operations in Chongqun. Immediately, the police launched a secret investigation, which lasted over 5 months. Eventually, they gathered enough evidence to take them down. The authorities split into 2 teams. One followed Qing Yun to Wuhan to track down and apprehend her drug supplier, while the other stayed behind in Chongqun to monitor and arrest Qing Yun and her associates. That day, officers had been waiting outside Wang Qingyun's residence for hours. As soon as Chen Danfeng appeared, they moved in and arrested her. From her possession, they seized 10.46 grams of meth and 12 ecstasy pills. With concrete evidence, the investigators stormed the apartment where Qing Yun and her daughter were using drugs. Inside, they found 26.38 grams of meth and 125 ecstasy pills. Zhao, who was keeping watch outside, was also caught. When police searched his backpack, they discovered 205 grams of meth and a staggering 1,431 ecstasy pills. After Wang Qingyun was taken into custody, the Changchun police immediately notified their counterparts in Wuhan. The Wuhan officers did not disappoint. With the assistance of local authorities, they successfully captured Wang Hongliang, the man supplying Qing Yun with drugs. At his residence, they seized 3,184 ecstasy pills, 11.75 grams of meth, and 53.9 grams of an unidentified white powder. One particularly disturbing discovery at Qing Yun's apartment left the police in shock. When they stormed in, they found her inside a room with over 10 young men, all in good physical shape. Initially, officers assumed they were her bodyguards. However, upon questioning, they realized these men were not there for protection. They were her companions. Investigators soon learned that all of these young men were drug addicts. If they wanted free access to drugs, they had to sleep with Ayar. Qing Yun. In an attempt to justify her actions, Qing Yun proudly compared herself to Empress Wu Zetian, claiming she was merely keeping young lovers like the ancient ruler. Hearing this, the police exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. But the shocking events didn't stop there. Sun Jiayue's behavior upon arrest was even more appalling than her mother's. After locating Jiayue, police followed her to a bathhouse. They spent nearly an entire day staking out the location before finally apprehending her. What happened next was beyond comprehension. Jiayu, in an act of sheer desperation, attempted to seduce the officers. She naively believed that her beauty could help her negotiate a lighter sentence. The dark side of the case. In the end, the police seized a total of 4,652 ecstasy pills, 253.6 grams of methamphetamine, 53.9 grams of black powder, 2 vehicles involved in drug trafficking, and 260,000 yuan in drug money. During the interrogation, Wang Qingyun tried to justify herself. She admitted that she knew drug trafficking was illegal, but she claimed she had no other choice due to her desperate circumstances. Qingyun insisted that she was forced into this path by her situation. She had many siblings, yet none of them ever offered to help her. In fact, she claimed that not a single one of them had ever given her even 100 yuan. She said she had tried to find a job, but due to her poor health, no one would even hire her as a nanny. In her statement, she described how, after experiencing the cold indifference of the world, she finally decided to take this route. What was truly sad was that, after choosing this path, Qingyun not only felt no remorse but even found enjoyment in it. She admitted that using drugs not only brought her money but also helped relieve the pain in her body. Even while in prison, Qingyun appeared cheerful. She confessed that in the past, she had always been alone at home, with no one to talk to. But now, in the detention center, she shared a space with 20 other inmates. The liveliness of the place made her feel less lonely. To someone who had spent years in isolation, this environment felt like paradise. One can only wonder how Sun Jiayu must have felt upon hearing these words from her mother. In the past, after losing her father's love, she had longed for affection from others. However, in her pursuit of external validation, She neglected her mother's emotions. After losing her husband and watching her daughter leave home, Qingyun also sank into despair. Left alone in an empty house, it was inevitable that her mental state would deteriorate. Perhaps everything in life happens for a reason. Yet, no matter the circumstances, breaking the law is never justified. There were always other paths she could have taken. It was Jia Yu's downfall that led her mother down this irreversible path of crime. In the end, their fates were sealed, and their punishment was deserved. However, many people still sympathized with their tragic and turbulent lives. And you, what do you think of this infamous mother-daughter duo? This is the story of Judith Barcie, a child star who hadn't even turned 9 at the time. Before starring in Jaws, The Revenge, Judith had already appeared in numerous animated films, television series, and commercials. With her golden hair, big sparkling eyes, chubby cheeks, and innocent smile, she captured the hearts of audiences everywhere. The film Jaws. The Revenge was one of her most successful works, marking a promising step in her career. However, less than 2 years after its release, a shocking tragedy occurred. Judith, only 10 years old, was found dead in her own home. Her mother, Maria, had also been murdered. Could this be part of the tragic curse of Hollywood child stars? Many young stars like Lindsay Lohan, Macaulay Culkin, and Judy Garland, the actress who played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, faced struggles growing up. But none of them met a fate as horrifying and heartbreaking as Judith's. What really happened? Today, we will uncover the story behind the screen of this child actress. A glimmer of hope for a Hollywood dream. In 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. Amidst the chaos and economic collapse, many Hungarians fled the country. Among them were Judith's father, Joseph Barcie, and her mother, Maria. They left everything behind, immigrating to the United States in search of a better life. Joseph Barcie was born in 1932 and endured a tragic childhood. When he was just 2 years old, both of his parents abandoned him, leaving him to a life of homelessness and instability. This deep-rooted fear of abandonment shaped him into a hardened, anxious, and controlling man. When the uprising in Hungary began, Joseph escaped to Austria, then to France, and finally, after years of wandering, arrived in the US during his journey. He married his first wife, but the marriage was short-lived due to his violent nature. Maria, too, had a painful past. She was born into a household with an alcoholic father and suffered both physical and emotional abuse as a child. When the revolution erupted, she fled Hungary, traveling through Germany before reaching the US, carrying her wounds, but also an unshaken desire to change her fate. In Los Angeles, Maria worked as a waitress in a restaurant where she met Joseph, a man who often visited the bar. Unlike other customers, Joseph would casually pay with crisp $100 bills, giving off the impression of wealth. In reality, he was just a plumber with a stable income. But to Maria, a woman who had endured so much hardship, Joseph seemed like a safe and reliable choice, and so, despite having many suitors, she chose him. They married in 1977. A year later, in June 1978, Judith Barcie was born. Maria was passionate about cinema. During her turbulent youth, Hollywood films provided her with comfort. The dazzling movies and glamorous stars on the big screen mesmerized her. To Maria, Hollywood symbolized dreams and success, the only escape from poverty and instability. She had always dreamed of Hollywood, but now, after having Judith, she transferred all her aspirations onto her daughter. Maria and Joseph adored Judith, but they also placed heavy expectations on her. From the time Judith was just 2 years old, Maria dedicated herself entirely to molding her into a Hollywood child star. She believed that Judith's stardom would bring to life the dream she had never been able to reach. To Maria, Judith was not just a daughter, she was her only hope of touching the silver screen dream. Maria's persistence eventually paid off. When Judith turned 5, a casting agent spotted her and was immediately drawn to her charm and confidence. The agent believed Judith was perfect for commercials and children's roles. In fact, when they saw her ice skating, they thought she was 3 years old instead of 5 because of her petite frame. Thanks to the agent's recommendation, Judith landed her first commercial. Her screen debut was in a Donald Duck Orange Juice advertisement. With her natural acting skills, engaging personality, and camera awareness, she quickly became a sought-after face. Big brands lined up to feature her in their commercials, paving the way for Judith's bright future in show business. By 1984, at just 6 years old, Judith landed her first significant role in the TV film Fatal Vision, portraying Kimberly McDonald. The film was based on a real-life murder case that shocked America, where a man named Jeffrey McDonald was convicted of murdering his wife and 2 daughters, including Kimberly, the role Judith played. Chillingly, the movie's storyline bore an eerie resemblance to the tragic fate that awaited Judith, as if foreshadowing the horror to come. Judith's career skyrocketed. By the time she was 8, she was earning over $100,000 a year, equivalent to roughly $200,000 today. But fame came at a heavy cost. Her grueling work schedule deprived her of a normal childhood. She had almost no friends her age, and her education was constantly interrupted for film shoots. To the world, she was a talented and successful child star, but behind the glamour, she was being pulled into an inescapable nightmare. A home filled with pain. Judith's father, Joseph, revealed his true violent nature soon after marrying Maria. He frequently yelled and physically abused his wife, even in front of others. His friends all knew about his violent temper. When Judith was born, his anger and beatings extended to his daughter as well. The close bond between Maria and Judith seemed to irritate him even more. He believed that Maria was spoiling Judith too much, using that as an excuse to impose cruel punishments on her, both physical and emotional. Their neighbors once recounted a heartbreaking incident. One day, Maria gave Judith a red kite as a gift. The little girl was overjoyed, but before she even had a chance to fly it, Joseph snatched it from her hands. Judith burst into tears, begging him to return it. But Joseph turned to Maria coldly and said, "See, she doesn't know how to share. I told you, you're spoiling her." Then, without hesitation, he tore the kite apart right in front of Judith and walked away, leaving her sobbing uncontrollably. Joseph was an alcoholic and had stopped working regularly. When he was drunk, he frequently beat his wife and daughter, smashed household items, and made their lives unbearable. Maria and Judith became terrified of returning home. But Joseph's violence wasn't just physical. He was also obsessively controlling. He dictated every aspect of Maria and Judith's lives, forbidding them from having any male acquaintances. On multiple occasions, he threatened Maria, "If you ever try to leave me, I'll slit your throat." Even though Judith became famous and earned a substantial income, allowing the family to move from a cramped apartment to a spacious house, Joseph did not feel grateful. Instead, he grew increasingly resentful and anxious, fearing that his control over his wife and daughter was slipping away. He was both jealous of Judith for being the family's primary breadwinner and unable to give up the comfortable lifestyle her earnings provided. This only made him tighten his grip, forbidding unnecessary outings, intercepting Maria's mail, and repeatedly threatening to kill them both. A neighbor later told the Los Angeles Times that Joseph had said hundreds of times that he would kill his wife. The neighbor once tried reasoning with him, asking, "If you kill your wife, what will happen to your daughter?" But Joseph coldly replied, "I'll kill her too." Under the unbearable pressure at home, Maria sought help from people in the film industry. She often confided in crew members, admitting that she and Judith were terrified of going home. Some advised her to leave Joseph as soon as possible, but her fear of him was too overwhelming to act. In 1986, after one particularly violent threat from Joseph, Maria finally called 911. But when the police arrived, they found no concrete evidence of abuse and had no legal grounds to arrest him. Feeling helpless and scared, Maria chose not to press charges. That same year, 8-year-old Judith landed a major role in Jaws, The Revenge, a film that was set to be shot in the Bahamas. Before Maria and Judith left for the trip, Joseph gave them a chilling send-off. Holding a knife to his daughter's throat, he growled, "If you don't come back to me, I'll slit your throat." Imagine the horror of a child being threatened with death by her own father. The psychological damage this must have caused is unimaginable. Yet, This was Judith's reality, a sweet, innocent girl, always eager to please her parents, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. If she stayed, she would continue suffering under Joseph's abuse. If she ran, he would surely kill her. Like many abused children, Judith naively believed that the problem was her fault. Maybe she wasn't obedient enough. Maybe she wasn't working hard enough. Maybe if she tried a little more, her father would finally be kind to her and her mother. But we all know that was just a child's desperate illusion. By 1988, everything reached a breaking point. Not even 10 years old, Judith's cheerful, happy-go-lucky persona began to crack. She displayed strange, troubling behaviors. The most noticeable was that she started pulling out her eyelashes, something known as trichotillomania, a compulsive disorder often linked to anxiety, depression, or trauma. People suffering from this condition feel an uncontrollable urge to pull out their hair as a way to cope with stress. After plucking out all her eyelashes, Judith even began pulling the whiskers from her pet cat. During this time, she confided in friends, saying, "I'm scared to go home. My dad is getting worse. He drinks every day. I know he wants to kill my mom." In May of that year, Judith auditioned for All Dogs Go to Heaven. But in the middle of singing, she suddenly broke down in tears, unable to continue. Maybe the lyrics had struck a deep, painful chord inside her, triggering emotions she had buried for so long. She simply couldn't hold it in anymore. Judith's agent, Ruth Hansen, finally realized the severity of the situation. She urged Maria to take Judith to a child psychologist. After just one session, the psychologist immediately contacted Ruth, warning, "This child has severe emotional and psychological distress. I have no choice but to report this to Child Protective Services." For the first time, someone officially recognized the suffering Judith was enduring. Child Protective Services opened an investigation, but the bureaucratic process moved too slowly. Realizing that danger was imminent, Maria decided to act on her own. She began secretly planning to leave Joseph, despite knowing the risks of his retaliation. She quietly rented an apartment near the film studio and started moving their belongings little by little. Whenever Judith wasn't filming, they would stay at the new apartment, only returning to the house at night. Maria's plan was to finalize everything before officially divorcing Joseph. To make herself less appealing to him, she even stopped cleaning the house, letting it fall into complete disarray. The plan seemed to be working, at least for a while. Joseph started seeing a much younger woman. When Maria and Judith moved into their new apartment, Child Protective Services determined that Judith was no longer in immediate danger. At Maria's request, they closed the case in less than a month, without conducting any further investigation. It was the second time after the 1986 police report that the authorities briefly stepped in, only to walk away, abandoning the mother and daughter once again. Time passed. On July 25, 1988, shortly after Judith's 10th birthday, a neighbor saw her riding her bike around the neighborhood. No one knew it would be the last time they ever saw her alive. That afternoon, Judith missed an important appointment. When someone called the house to check on her, Joseph answered and claimed that Maria and Judith had driven to San Diego. The next day, her agent, Ruth Hansen, called again. This time, Joseph's response sent chills down her spine. In a strange, detached voice, he said, "I'm about to leave forever, but before I go, I just wanted to say goodbye to my little girl." Around 8:30 a.m., a neighbor watering their lawn heard a loud gunshot. Moments later, smoke and flames erupted from the Barcie home. Panicked, the neighbor called the police, but by the time firefighters arrived, the fire was already out of control. When the flames were finally extinguished, rescue workers found 3 charred bodies inside the house: Judith, Maria, and Joseph. Based on the evidence, investigators reconstructed the horrific events. Judith had been shot in the head while lying on her side in bed. The bullet entered through the back of her skull. Maria had been shot in the hallway, likely as she tried to run when she heard the first gunshot. No one knew the exact time they were killed, but it was likely on the night of July 25th. After murdering his wife and daughter, Joseph remained in the house with their bodies for a full day. He even picked up the phone when Ruth Hansen called, speaking as if nothing had happened, a chilling display of cold-blooded detachment. On the morning of July 27th, knowing there was no way out, Joseph doused the house in gasoline and set it on fire. Then he went into the garage and shot himself. After years of threats, Joseph finally did what he had always promised. He murdered his wife and child. Judith was only 10 years old, standing just 112 centimeters tall when she died. A photograph from the crime scene left everyone who saw it heartbroken. In it, a police officer was carrying Judith's small, lifeless body out of the rubble. She looked so tiny, so light, as if she were nothing more than a wisp of smoke drifting away. Her life was as fleeting as a shooting star, leaving behind only a brief flicker of light before vanishing into the darkness. Though Judith Barcie's career was short-lived, her performances and her story left a lasting impact on audiences. But her tragic death also served as a harsh wake-up call for Hollywood and society as a whole. Movie studios, law enforcement, child protection agencies, friends, and family, so many people had seen the warning signs. But no one acted decisively enough to save her. If just one person had intervened sooner, if someone had cared just a little more, this tragedy might never have happened. But life doesn't work with ifs. Judith's story gained attention because she was a child star, but in the shadows, how many other children endure suffering no one should ever have to face? Her story is a brutal reminder that behind closed doors, unimaginable horrors can take place, and that domestic violence can have devastating consequences. Whether a rising star or an ordinary child, every child in this world deserves to grow up in love, free from fear, tragedy, and pain. What do you think about this case?
Between 2003 and 2007, a monster disguised as a human prowled the taxi industry, preying on and brutally murdering dozens of innocent young women in a peaceful rural area of China. The horrifying truth began to surface when the first bodies were discovered. The emergence of fear. By 2003, living standards in China had significantly improved. However, private car ownership was still uncommon, making taxis a popular mode of transportation in cities nationwide. Yet, there was an exception: the taxi industry in Zan Huang County, Shenzhen City, where September 12, 2003. Although, since then, women in Zan Huang County were gripped by fear. They avoided going out alone, relied on their parents for school commutes, and rarely dared to take taxis. This fear crippled not just the local taxi industry but cast a shadow of terror over the entire town. The heartbreaking reality was that these missing girls had been abducted, raped, and murdered. The perpetrator? A taxi driver. A man the locals would later call a cold-blooded monster. Not only was he ruthless, but he also possessed an uncanny ability to evade surveillance, making it incredibly difficult for the police to capture him. Even under suspicion, he continued his crimes boldly, right under the investigators' noses. So, who was this taxi driver? What turned him into such a heartless killer? And why did it take the police over 3 years to finally catch him? The predator of innocent girls. Zhang Lei. Zhang Lei was born in 1980 in Hualin Village, Zan Huang County, Shizhuang City, Hebei Province, China. As a child, Zhang was a poor student. After graduating from high school, he didn't pursue further education. Unlike most young men his age who sought jobs elsewhere, Zhang was introverted, quiet, and preferred staying at home, helping his parents with farm work. When Zhang turned 20, his parents grew concerned about his future. Hoping to set him on a stable career path and eventually help him settle down, they enrolled him in a driving school. Surprisingly, despite his introverted nature and poor academic record, Zhang learned to drive quickly and passed the tests on his first attempt. After obtaining his driver's license, his family pooled their savings to buy him a car, allowing him to work as a taxi driver. At that time, Zan Huang's taxi industry was thriving. Thanks to this, Zhang's family's finances improved significantly within just a few years. Seeing their son in stable employment, his parents arranged a marriage for him with a girl from a neighboring village. Their married life seemed peaceful. His wife stayed home to care for the family, while Zhang drove his taxi daily, returning home in the evenings. Zhang became a trusted driver, well acquainted with every street and alley in the county. His income was stable, providing comfortably for his family. By all accounts, Zhang Lei should have been content. However, frequent interactions with various passengers, especially young women, sparked dark, twisted desires within him. He developed a dangerous obsession with young, fashionable women. These growing urges eventually pushed him down a dark path. The first victim. On the afternoon of September 12, 2003, Ding Maoling, a 20-year-old woman, approached Zhang Lei's taxi, intending to hire him for a ride. It was an ordinary day in Bailu Village, Longmengxi Township, Zan Huang County. But when Zhang laid eyes on the young, attractive and stylish woman, the monster within him awakened. Exploiting Ding's trust, Zhang deliberately drove in the opposite direction of her destination. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. Zhang had taken her to a remote, desolate area, far from help and prying eyes. There, Zhang sexually assaulted Ding Maoling. After committing the heinous act, he brutally murdered her, then disposed of her body in a large pit. The pit was originally an ancient tomb from the southern and northern dynasties, but after being looted, it had become an open cavity. Although it was located in farmland, where the body could have been easily discovered, fate intervened. A nearby landfill operator accidentally dumped trash into the pit, completely covering Ding Maoling's remains. After the murder, Zhang returned home, gripped by fear. He was terrified that the police would soon find out. However, as days passed without any developments, his anxiety faded. Believing his method was foolproof, he grew bolder. This false sense of security led him to commit his next crime, the second murder. On October 1, 2003, during the National Day holiday, a time when many students traveled home, Yang Mao, a young woman from Zhujianzi village, Shooting Township, Zan Huang County, was among the travelers. At the Zan Huang bus station, she spotted Zhang's taxi. His simple, innocent appearance, complete with cloth shoes, aroused no suspicion. She got into his car, unaware she had just stepped into the clutches of a cold-blooded killer. Using the same tactics as before, Zhang drove Yang Mao to an isolated location. There, he sexually assaulted and viciously murdered her, later dumping her body into an old well. When Yang Mao went missing, her family initially believed she had been abducted by human traffickers and taken to remote, impoverished mountain regions. Desperate to find her, they searched tirelessly across Zan Huang County, Shijiazhuang City, and even ventured into remote areas of Shaanxi and Shaanxi provinces. Despite their exhaustive efforts, no clues surfaced. Yang Mao had vanished without a trace. The disappearance of two young women within such a short period alarmed the Zan Huang County police. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, they ramped up manpower and launched an extensive investigation throughout the town. Dozens of officers scoured every street and alley daily, hoping to uncover any leads connected to the missing girls. However, their efforts yielded nothing. No missing persons, no bodies, no concrete evidence. The investigation hit a dead end, leaving the police without a clear direction. Observing the growing scale of the investigation, Zhang Lei realized he was under suspicion. To avoid detection, he decided to temporarily freeze his activities. During this period, he refrained from committing further crimes and even switched vehicles, replacing his familiar old taxi with a new van to alter his identity and evade police surveillance. This strategy proved effective. For over 6 months, the police found no evidence linking him to the crimes. The earlier disappearances faded into the background due to the lack of new information. Once again, the cold-blooded killer slipped through the cracks of the legal system. The killing resumes. A trail of terror continues. Despite his temporary pause, Zhang's predatory instincts remained sharp. He sensed that police scrutiny was gradually easing. Emboldened by this realization, he resumed his heinous activities, once again shattering the peace of his hometown. On May 2, 2004, during a public holiday, Li Mao, a 17-year-old girl working in Pingshan County, was preparing to return home for the summer break. Her family lived in Shiduan Village, Longmengxi Township, Zan Huang County. Like many others, She went to the Zan Huang bus station and boarded a van, a common local transportation service that charged just 1 yuan per trip. Unfortunately, the driver that day was none other than Zhang Lei, and Li Mao was his only passenger. During the journey, Zhang diverted the van to an isolated location where he sexually assaulted and brutally murdered the young girl. To dispose of her body, he dumped it into an old well in Yuanshe County. Less than 4 months later, on August 21, 2004, another victim fell into Zhang's trap. Wang Maoxian, a young woman from Nama Village, Nangsingguang Township, Zan Huang County, boarded what she thought was an ordinary 1 yuan van ride home. Tragically, she had chosen Zhang's van. Seizing the opportunity, Zhang repeated his brutal pattern of rape and murder. This time, however, he couldn't find a suitable place to hide the body. In a careless move, he dumped her remains in a cornfield in Baixia Village, Xintai County. This recklessness marked a turning point in Zhang's crime spree, a break in the case. Just 4 days later, on August 25, 2004, the Baixia County Police received a report from a local farmer who had discovered Wang Maoxian's decomposing body in his family's cornfield. After conducting an investigation, police confirmed that the remains belonged to the young woman who had recently been reported missing in Zan Huang County, Shizhejuang. The discovery of Wang's body shifted the focus of the earlier missing persons cases. They were now officially murder investigations. This revelation captured the attention of law enforcement agencies at all levels. Compiling all available evidence, investigators noticed a crucial pattern. All the victims had disappeared after boarding 1 yuan vans, commonly referred to as black taxis, unregistered vehicles operating illegally. This lead significantly narrowed the scope of the investigation. Authorities began tracking all 1 yuan transportation services and unauthorized drivers operating in the region. However, despite the police's renewed efforts, the investigation stagnated once again. No suspects were identified, and the killer remained elusive. During this time, fear and paranoia spread throughout Zan Huang County and neighboring areas. Parents forbade their daughters from going out alone, especially avoiding the notorious 1 yuan vans. Daily life was disrupted, and the community lived under a cloud of constant anxiety. Yet, even this widespread fear wasn't enough to deter Zhang Lei. Immediately after Wang's body was found, Zhang made another calculated move. He switched from his van to a private car, believing that changing vehicles would help him blend in and target new victims without drawing police attention. This tactic worked. He successfully concealed his identity and stayed one step ahead of the investigation. On December 24, 2004, the weather in Zan Huang County was freezing, with thick snow blanketing the roads. On that day, a young woman named Lin Maofan was preparing to return home. Normally, she would ride her bicycle, but the snow was too deep, and the roads were slippery. Hoping her family could pick her up, Lin called home, but her family had an emergency and couldn't come. Concerned about the recent disappearances in the area, Lin's mother advised her to ask a relative to pick her up. Unfortunately, her trusted uncle was not in town. With no other options, Lin decided to take a taxi. To avoid potential danger, she chose not to board a cheap taxi, but instead opted for a more expensive one, believing it would be safer. Tragically, that choice sealed her fate. The taxi she boarded was driven by none other than Zhang Lei. His eyes gleamed with sinister intent the moment Lin got into his car. She was exactly the type of victim he sought. During the journey, he assaulted and murdered her in cold blood. This time, Zhang had learned from his past mistakes. Instead of hastily disposing of the body, he carefully planned the cover-up. He placed Lin's body in a woven sack, added large stones to weigh it down, and tightly secured it. He then dumped the sack into a water well outside Duhu Village, Zan Huang County. On March 7, 2005, 2 local villagers discovered the suspicious sack while watering their fields. When they opened it, they were horrified to find Lin Maofan's decomposing body. Unfortunately, due to the extended time since her death, the remains were severely decomposed, providing little forensic evidence. Between September 2004 and that discovery, several other female bodies were found in Zan Huang County and surrounding areas. All victims shared the same tragic fate. They had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. The police now classified the case as a serial murder investigation, but the lack of witnesses and the advanced state of decomposition of the bodies severely hampered progress. Due to the brutality of the crimes, the case caught the attention of the Provincial Police Bureau. On August 22, 2006, a specialized task force of national criminal experts was dispatched to Zan Huang to oversee the investigation. Despite their expertise, the initial efforts of the task force yielded no major breakthroughs because of the lack of concrete evidence. However, they soon identified a critical pattern. All victims disappeared after boarding taxis or similar transport vehicles. The investigators noticed several commonalities. All victims were young women aged 17 to 20. The disappearances occurred near bus stations, hospitals, or taxi stands. All cases happened during the daytime, with the victims traveling home to rural areas. Each victim was sexually assaulted before being killed. These patterns suggested that the perpetrator was exploiting public transportation, possibly even posing as a taxi driver, to target his victims. Realizing this connection, the task force launched a large-scale inspection campaign, targeting all taxis, vans, and cheap tricycles operating in Zan Huang County. Over 5,000 vehicles were checked, but no clear leads emerged. During this sweep, the police even inspected Zhang Leilei's vehicle. However, lacking concrete evidence or any suspicious signs, they failed to identify him as the cold-blooded killer they had been hunting for years. Zhang's next move: a change in strategy. The vehicle inspections rattled Zhang. But instead of stopping, he adapted. He realized that his murders had drawn too much attention, both from the police and the public. To avoid capture, he decided to change his modus operandi. He would now only assault his victims without killing them. At first, this tactic worked. The victims he assaulted chose to remain silent, driven by feelings of shame or fear. This silence prevented the police from expanding their investigation. However, on March 30, 2007, everything changed. One of Zhang's latest victims, who managed to escape with her life, bravely reported the assault to the authorities. Her testimony provided crucial information, allowing the task force to identify and arrest Zhang Leilei, the monster unmasked. Under interrogation, Zhang Leilei confessed to raping over 10 young women and brutally murdering 6 of them. His horrifying crimes shocked not only the investigators but the entire nation. On August 24, 2007, Zhang was sentenced to death. The cold-blooded monster finally faced the justice he deserved.